We heard planes coming and looked. Fighter planes, looks like fighter planes. Three of this flight of planes that were coming in peeled off from their flight and dived down on the three planes of ours that were tied up with buoys out in the harbor and almost instantly set them on fire. At that time, when they rolled over, we saw that red ball on the wings and realized, Japs, we are being attacked.
Our story begins in Adams County, Ohio, Upper Blue Creek, where Floyd Knauff and Millie Hafer were born, raised, and married, where they farmed their land and raised their own three children, Oscar, Ruth, and Charley. Charley kept himself busy on the farm and at school. His senior year, he participated as the business manager of the yearbook, played on the basketball team, and was a member of the senior survey class and scholarship entry. When he graduated, Charley wasn't interested in following in his father's footsteps.
Back in those days, a man's pay for a day's work on a farm was $1 a day and his dinner. That just didn't appeal to me, so I went to Portsmouth, Ohio, and signed up for the Navy. See the world through a porthole, as the advertisement said.
Charley spent the next 6 years seeing the world, and he had many adventures. In 1940, Charley trained in Illinois. From there, he graduated from Aviation Metalsmith School in Pensacola, Florida. Before heading to San Diego, he was on leave and decided to visit some friends and family.
And on that way, somewhere between Birmingham and Louisville, I met my future wife, Bessie May McClooney.
Charley spotted pretty Bessie May McClooney, who was traveling with her mother. Despite Mrs. McClooney's attempts to stop their flirting, when Charley left the train, he had Bessie's address in hand. After working on World War I type destroyers in San Diego, Charley was ordered to report to Hawaii. He took the USS Pennsylvania to Pearl Harbor.
Came into Pearl Harbor and was assigned to VP-23. VP means aviation, of course, and the P means patrol, and 23 was the number of the squadron. In June of 1941, VP-23 moved over from Ford Island, which is in the middle of Pearl Harbor, to a new air base that was built on the other side of Oahu, Kaneohe Bay. Kaneohe Bay Naval Air Station, brand new. We put it into commission. And at the same time, our squadron number was changed from VP-23 to VP-11, Fleet Air Wing 1, VP-11. Squadron at that time consisted generally of 15 PBYs. I was in the beach crew. Having grown up on a farm and having driven a tractor some, I was promoted to a tractor driver. The plane would come in slowly towards the ramp. Members of the beach crew would get to the wing, which would be extending over the ramp, and turn the plane around to where it was tail first towards the ramp. At that time, the tractor would be hooked onto the plane, and the tractor would pull the plane back up the ramp and to its position where it would be parked. And those planes were etched into their parking places to where they were lined up to where you could almost take a ruler, if you were looking at it, using it as a straight edge, and sight down the planes to where they would be almost perfectly in line. December 7th, 1941, that day that will live in infamy, I had drawn the duty for that weekend, and I was petty officer of the watch. The officer of the day and I were standing down at one of the seaplane ramps talking. We heard planes coming and looked. Fighter planes, looks like fighter planes. Three of this flight of planes that were coming in peeled off from the flight, dived down on the three planes of ours that were tied up at buoys out in the harbor, and almost instantly set them on fire. At that time, when they rolled over, we saw that red ball on the wings and realized, uh-oh, Japs, we are being attacked. And since we were on the their route towards Pearl Harbor, they got to us shortly before they hit Pearl Harbor, just minutes, but just before they hit Pearl Harbor. Those planes then started to strafe our planes, which, as I said before, were lined up wingtip to wingtip in perfect rows. The duty officer took off on that Kushner motor scooter towards the hangar to sound the alarm. I took off. I was on a bicycle. I think I passed the duty officer. But there was no reason to sound the alarm because all the noise that was going on had gotten everybody alarmed. I remember I went into the outside door of one of the hangars. I had a .45 caliber automatic pistol and did my best shooting at the planes with a pistol. Well, they were less than 50 feet high and no more than I would say a couple of 100 feet away as they came down to strafe our lines of planes. We spent the night up on the hill above Kaneohe Bay, not knowing what was going to happen. I had my .45 still with plenty of ammunition. I had a .30 caliber Springfield rifle, a 1903 model Springfield rifle, and we had a .30 caliber machine gun. We drove a pipe down in the ground, set that machine gun in the top of the pipe, and we probably had the first foxhole of World War II. Nothing happened. It rained during the night, as it usually did, a brilliant shower. Stars, clear, cold, with that rain, no shelter. And the next morning we started to get back together on Monday morning to find out what had happened and what we were going to do. We learned that Pearl Harbor had been very badly hit. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that we had no warning whatsoever. No one had said anything about the possibility of war. Seems to me like we had only seven men that were killed. One of them was one of the men that was on my beach crew. And the duty officer who I was speaking to when that all started was killed, as well as his relief. There were quite a few wounded, but only 7 killed. The Japanese, and by the way, we were told, I believe it was later on that day, that it was all right now to call them Japs, not Japanese. They were interested in destroying our planes rather than in killing us, and they did a very good job. We had 3 planes out on patrol that morning in an opposite direction from which the Japs came. And when it was all over, in addition to those 3 planes which got back in safely, there was possibly 2 or 3 others that were repairable. As I said, we had no warning. We did not know what was coming off. One of the things in the confusion was the word was passed that dungarees, which people now call jeans, Levi's, was not a recognized uniform, and we were at war. So the word was passed that everyone had to get into uniform. Of course, it was hot, and we got into whites, the hot weather uniform. Then the word was passed that these white uniforms were really showing up. They were extremely visible. So we lined up in a row down at the mess hall, took off those whites, dunked them into a vat, a tub of coffee, run up through a roller wringer, put them back on, and now we had coffee-dyed whites, khaki whites.
To prepare for war, VP-11 began rebuilding their base and started an aerial gunnery school. Charley went to automatic pilot, maintenance, and bombardier school and became a member of a flight crew in July of 1942. After many local flights, they started flying down the South Pacific. The majority of Charley's flight time was with pilot Charles Willis.
He was a character in himself. Fact of the matter is, the names of our planes that we had were fabulous characters.
Charles Willis, Charley, and the other flight crew members were featured in Red Book magazine. September 6th of 1942, Charley's crew ran into a Japanese flying boat and spent 3 days and nights stranded at sea.
Our plane captain, Brankovich, was killed on this. We took hits into our gas tanks and ran out of gasoline and had to set down out at sea and spent 3 days and nights. First night we stayed on the plane and bailed. We had holes in the bottom where water would come in, and we needed to bail to keep the plane from sinking. But the water was so rough, the next day we started breaking up, so we got into the rubber boats. Didn't have any food, didn't have any water. But after 3 days, we were picked up by the Bired, which was an old World War II destroyer that had been converted into a small seaplane tender. They came up near us and hailed us and said, do we need to send a boat for you? And we said, no, we can make it over there. So we rowed, paddled our rubber boats over to the side of the destroyer and climbed up the rope ladder. But we couldn't walk when we got up on deck. Of course, we'd been sitting. You can't stand up in a rubber boat. We'd been sitting for 3 days and nights almost. And we couldn't walk, so a sailor got on each side of us and helped us down below, got into a nice warm shower, slept for about 24 hours, woke up, had some hot tomato soup, cream of tomato soup. Man, that was good. That was good. And we were back flying again 6 days later on September the 12th.
On November 19th, the tables turned as Charley's crew rescued some Army officers whose B-17th had been shot down.
A native plane had photographed some rubber boats on an island near where the plane had been shot down, and probably there were some survivors. And natives rowed the survivors of that B-17 out to RPDY in dugout canoes, took them on board, took off, went back to Espirito Santos where we were flying from. Come to find out, there was a man, a survivor on that crew by the name of Saunders, S-A-U-N-D-E-R-S, Laverne Saunders, who ended up general in charge of the first B-19 bombing wing, which bombed Japan a year later.
December 1st, Charley earned the title of a wing walker as she clung to the outside of the plane while it was in flight.
When we were taken off for a routine patrol, on this particular morning, apparently the wind was blowing towards the shelter between the islands, and the waves were running pretty high. Well, we bounced into the air before we really had flying speed on that takeoff run, and hit the water and bounced again, and our right wingtip dipped. Well, about that time, the pilot poured all the power onto it that he could get from the engines, and somehow or other managed to keep the plane in the air. even though the right wingtip had hit the water and dipped and actually had torn the float off. We can't go out on patrol in the shape that we're in. We'll have to come back in and land and see what damage was done. Because we don't have a float on that right-hand wing out there, we need to get a couple of men out on the left-hand wing to balance the plane to where it doesn't tip over to the right. So we came in and landed and slowed down, and of course I was designated to go out on the wing, one of the two to go out on the wing. I got out onto the back of the plane, climbed up onto the wing, and had just got hold of a little fitting which was used to put a sling on to hoist the plane out of the water if it was necessary. Just got one finger through this hole in that fitting when off the water we went, back up into the air again. Here I was, kneeling on the wing of that plane, holding on with one finger, so to speak. One of our mechanics, the second mechanic, saw that I was up on the wing before we had left the water, and he was the second man to come out. Well, he got blown off. He got blown off before he could get a hold of the handholds that were in the lower edge of the wing. And Garchow, our second radioman, saw that he had blown off. Well, we want two men out on the wing. I better get out there. So out he comes. Well, he gets to where he has something to hold on to when off the water we went. And our plane captain saw where we were at, that we were out on the wing. The reason he'd taken off again was because we had knocked a bunch of rivets out of the bottom of the boat with that hard takeoff, the bounces that we had done. Well, we carried a bunch of small pencil stubs that we would punch down into the holes where the rivets had come out of to keep water from coming in. But there had been so many rivets bounced out that the pilot was afraid that we would get too much water in, and we were too far from the beach. We were planning to run it up on the beach, and we were too far away, he thought. So he took it up into the air and was coming back to land again closer to the beach. So there we were. We probably got up 500-600 feet, probably flew 5-10 minutes, something like that, come back in and landed. Again, I was able to go out onto the end of the wing. Garchow came out with me then. Of course, poor old Sinclair, he had been blown off. He said he went bouncing off across the water just like a rock skipping. And a Marine Raider battalion, which was there on an island where we were at, saw what was happening and picked him up.
January 20th, 1944. Charley's crew landed with no brakes and no flaps.
When flying in front of a convoy way out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, we got a indication on our radar, which would be right where a submarine would be expected to lay in wait for that convoy to come by. And we were flying up at around 5,000-6,000 feet, dropped a parachute flare over this object, whatever it was, and went into a diving turn to start in on our bombing run. The parachute flare went off. I forgot to say this was in the middle of the night, 1 o'clock at night. Parachute flare went off. We were in position, coming right in towards it. Bomb bay doors were open, ready to drop. The pilot saw what it was about the same time I did and yelled, "Don't drop, it's a liming." And it was an English ship, a trawler, a Navy trawler that was miles out of position for some reason or other. Well, we were very close to it when we saw what it was. And the pilot turned the plane up to make a left turn to avoid flying directly over it. Remember, we were flying at about 50 feet. And as he turned the plane up, the ship opened up with us with all the guns that it had. Shooting at us. Shooting at us. He very nearly shot us down. We lost an engine immediately. Heavy caliber, probably 40 millimeter shell came up through the bomb bay doors before I got them closed, hit into the bottom of one of the gas tanks and exploded. Luckily, it didn't set us on fire, but it dropped all the gasoline out into the bomb bay. Some more hits knocked out our hydraulic system. But we made it back to England. And getting ready to land, still dark. Had to lower the landing gear down by cranking it. Didn't have any brakes, didn't have any flaps because they worked on the hydraulic pressure as well. So here we were landing on the left. One wheel on the left and the nose gear. Tricycle with only two wheels on it. Landed on the side of the runway because we were afraid that the sparks would set the gasoline fumes off if we landed on the runway, so we landed in the dirt, in the mud. Guy come running up on the wing, he said, "Where's the bodies? Where's the bodies?" I remember Willis saying, "Hey, you better get off of here, son. You're liable to fall off and get hurt." No one got any injuries out of that deal. Of course, there was an inquiry there. I never did learn what had happened to it. They should have been court-martialed for not shooting us down because we were no more than 100 yards away from it, brightly lit up by that parachute flare.
April 1st, 1944. They had orders to go home, and it wasn't a practical joke.
Site 6, Knauff speaking. And it was our squadron commander, Commander Brock. He said, "This is Commander Brock." Said, "Pass the word to all the guys in BB 103 to get their gear together. We're going up to Scotland, up to Clyde, Scotland, to catch ship transportation back to the States. Get everything together because there'll be trucks down to the site this afternoon to load up." And I started laughing. He said, "What are you laughing about?" And I said, "You know what today is?" And he said, "Yeah, April the 1st. And I said, "Yeah, April Fool's Day. You want me to pass the word we're going back to the States on April Fool's Day? If I don't get shot, at least I'll..." He said, "It is the truth. I'm not kidding. Pass the word." And it was the truth.
Once Charlie reached the States, one of the first people he gave a call to was Bessie.
Looking through my little black book, see who I might call to tell them we were back in the United States. And I happened to run across Bessie Mae McClooney's telephone number in Birmingham, Alabama. That girl that I'd met on the train back 3 years before, 1941. Called her in Birmingham and say, "Hey, how about a date next Saturday night?" We had written during these 3 years, but had never talked to each other, never seen each other. "Oh, yes, come on down." So, April the 27th, I don't remember when, let's see, April the 1st, we left Scotland. It took us 5 days. That had been about the 10th. It was probably about the 15th, something like that, that I was home, and I caught a train down to Birmingham. Anyway, April the 27th, we were married. She wouldn't let me get away from her.
On May 5th, 1946, Charlie's 6 years in the service were up, and he had to decide whether or not to re-enlist.
Time was coming up for me to make up my mind what to do, to stay in or get out. Lo and behold, my mind was made up for me. I was told that after re-enlistment that I was going to be part of a draft that was going out to the USS Midway, a seaplane carrier. And I said, well, I don't think I will. I don't think that I will re-enlist. I had only been back in the States for a few months.
Charlie went to Birmingham, Alabama, where he worked for the Standard Oil Company before returning to Blue Creek with his wife and his 2 children, Mike and Sue, to farm with his father.
When I think about the years we were on the farm, it was really a great time. It was like a time of freedom. We were young, and I spent a lot of time outdoors. Mike and I both did.
Since he had bought a tractor to help do the farming with his parents and had also bought a Jeep, an Army surplus Jeep, the one thing I remembered was since I had chores to do every day, I don't remember not having stuff to do every day. But one of the big things that I remember was one day we had to take the stuff into the field for tobacco planting, and he drove the tractor pulling the tobacco planter, and I drove the Jeep pulling the water wagon, because when you plant tobacco, you also have to give it a little bit of water with each plant that's done. And I was so small in driving a Jeep, probably only about 10 years old, that in order to drive the Jeep and see where I was going, I had to stand up to handle the steering wheel and see out the windshield. And we're talking about a Jeep, an Army surplus Jeep. But in order to stop the Jeep, in order to be able to press in the clutch and the brake, I had to sit down. And I thought that was neat that he let me help him take the stuff in the field by driving the Jeep. He says he don't remember that now, but you don't forget stuff like that. I don't.
Mainly, Dad was always working. He would be in the field. It was hard work. Being a farmer was hard work, and he and Grandpa worked together, and they had all the crops and the animals. We had cows that had to be milked, and the pigs, the hogs had to be slopped, and all the crops had to come in. And so he was busy. I don't really remember on the farm itself having Dad around the house much.
Unfortunately, I started having back troubles to where I was unable to do heavy work, and I figured I'd better get out of the farming business because that's no place to be if you're physically incapacitated. I had some back surgery, which apparently did cure the problem, and I think may have been because of some of the things I got into in the Navy that did not apply for any disability, of course.
In 1954, Charlie moved to Portsmouth, Ohio, and was hired by the new Gaseous Diffusion plant as a production operator, and retired in June of 1985 as superintendent of production services. So what does a man like this do in retirement? Well, he works. Charlie volunteers at the Shawnee Campus Ministry, a place where students can sell and buy their used textbooks. It is entirely volunteer-run, so the students are able to keep all the money their books sell for. Along with working at the ministry, Charlie keeps the records in order. He does crossword puzzles, lots of crossword puzzles, read books, and instead of smoking his famous cigars, he prefers to puff away on his pipe. But his pipe isn't the only thing he puffs away on. Charlie has been playing the harmonica for years, and how he got his start is quite an interesting story.
Well, it's like this. I asked someone how to play one of these things, and they say, just put it in your mouth and blow on it. So I did.
Once a week, he plays his harmonica at Heartland, a nursing home that is just down the road. There are a lot of residents that enjoy hearing him play, but one in particular is his wife, Bessie. After a stroke a few years back, she had to move to a place that could better care for her. But unfortunately, it was a bit of a drive. Now, after not too long, she was able to move here, to Heartland, and live just down the road from Charley.
When I hear Dad talk about when he was a young man in the Navy or during the war, I wish I could have known him then. It would be so neat if you could see your parents the way they were when they were younger, because I'm sure he was more carefree and had some fun, and I would like to have been able to see him that way.
The one thing that really stands out the most was the vacations we always took. Dad was always interested in seeing that we sort of had some adventures and took vacations.
This is the compass I used while I was in the Boy Scouts. I picked that out this year because a compass you use for setting your direction and finding your way. And I would say that I learned more in the Boy Scouts for life than I did 4 years at the University of Michigan on how to have a successful life and take care of myself. I would give my dad credit for me having gone through Fort of the Arrow all the way to brotherhood.
I would say that the best way to describe him would be a man who was a hard worker, always had good control over his life and family in general. An excellent family man.